All right. Hello.
Hello. This is not what we had planned, is it?
This is not ideal. I'm sorry again. Yeah, this is not exactly how we plan to do this. We are unfortunately still in the middle of a global pandemic, so we've got to keep safe and stay apart where we can, and hence technology and Zoom. So thanks for indulging.
It sums up the whole production process, really, doesn't it? The fact that this film was meant to come out 8 years ago, and because of a pandemic, it's now being released because we had a bit of a chat and you basically locked yourself in that room behind you for how many days did the re-edit take?
This was, I think it was about a month in the end, I think. Above me is Bryn Musselwhite, and Bryn was my producer on this film. Below Bryn is me, Al Clark. And Bryn basically has been my producer on like loads of commercials, and in fact the other video on this channel, the Bugatti video, Bryn is the producer on that as well, and tons of other commercials.
I'd like to refer to myself as your favorite stunt passenger. Because I was in the C-type in this film, holding onto a radio.
Oh yes,
you managed to get me. Yeah, and I was in a Chiron with a radio. So basically, Al's the creative talent, and I make sure we get sandwiches and cups of tea.
Yeah, that was exactly one of the moments, and I was in the jankiest Robinson helicopter film. So the whole thing was filmed before gimbals and stuff were really a thing, and I was leaning out of the window, handheld with my camera, just going with this thing as we're trying to keep up with the C-type doing like 45, 50 miles an hour through that amazing tunnel
on open roads as well, weren't we? We had a Jag XJ about 200 feet behind us, making sure that no one really got near us, but essentially we were just on an open road. And that helicopter, that's the first funniest story, I think. Right at the start of production, it really sticks with me because you said we need a helicopter over Lake Garda or Lake Como, wherever we were, and you sent me the opening sequence to what Bond film is it?
Yeah, it's Quantum of Solace.
We need this, and I was in so much of a hurry. I just emailed this YouTube clip to a helicopter company, and they came back and said, "Okay, you want machine guns and explosions?" And I was like, "What?" Looked at the clip and was like, "Oh my god!" Because I just saw these amazing tunnels and was like, "Right, that's all we need."
Yeah, that's all I need as well.
What's your favorite experience from that whole summer of 2012 when we went off and did this?
I think the magic moment for me was Reims, which is the opening sequence, because we'd gone down the night before. We sort of saw the way the sun comes down in Reims, and we saw, the possibility. And I think all of a sudden you realize that, there was a Jaguar. In fact, you can just see it in this screenshot here on the monitor behind. There was a Jaguar booth. The only manufacturer-sponsored pit lane was Jaguar. And I think the sequence came together pretty much exactly as we hoped. That was, I think, my favorite memory. And in the edit, when I put it all together, 8 years ago, it was nice to have that moment to see it. And then the context after Stirling's passed away and you see it again, it just kind of felt almost like seeing Stirling arriving at the pearly gates. What is heaven for Stirling?
Yeah, and that shot, and the shot you got of him looking into the camera that you put into the film at 11, 12 minutes, where he just looks and goes, "Hello, I'm Stirling Moss," is incredibly powerful. Just from the people, and I've been watching people who've seen the film with me and how they react to it. But even 8 years later, I see that shot. I was stood next to you. He said it to us. It's still one of the most powerful pieces. So
you made him redo it. You made him do it a couple of times because you didn't like his delivery on the first one.
Should I say hello first, or should I say I'm saying also hello?
You are the only person in the world that can say that, right?
Hello, I'm Stirling Moss.
He'd said it in a way that said like, "Hello, I am Stirling Moss," and you're like, no. You don't know who you are, Stirling Moss. You are Stirling Moss. Right, brilliant.
Lovely.
So hi everyone, and we are in a lockdown, so unfortunately this is all still going to have to be recorded remotely, so it's such a shame, but we are now here, and here we are 6 months after the film came out on Sky Documentaries. And Andrew, you knew Stirling better than all of us really involved, and one of the people that really kind of helped orchestrate the film. You met Stirling a long time ago, and you've known him for a long time. Could you just very quickly just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I first met Stirling a very, very long time ago when he was, in fact, it was Mille related, because Mercedes used to pay him to drive his old Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR around the course when they ran it as a retrospective. And I, one year, got sent down there to chase him. And ended up standing behind him in a lunch queue. And Stirling was good at many things, but being patient wasn't one of them. And it was one of those never meet your heroes people, because he wasn't behaving himself terribly well. He might have been a bit rude to a few people, and I can understand here thinking, I don't want this to be, my image of my hero being shattered by this rather abrupt, brusque man. And it was only later when I got to know him rather better that I realized that there were very much two sides to him, and that he was fundamentally, he was quite a shy bloke. And he wasn't terribly patient, but to those he knew and to those he trusted, he was one of the nicest, kindest, funniest blokes you could ever wish to spend any time with at all.
And one day he was actually doing a commentary on the Miami Grand Prix in 1985, a street race for sports cars, the big Lowenbrow Porsche stuff that I raced here in World Championship. And Stirling came, I won the race, and Stirling was doing a commentary, and he came up to me afterwards. Literally, I was walking through the paddock, it was dusk, and he was walking towards me. Why he was on his own, why I was on my own, I was going back to my car, I guess. And he came and he said, "Well done, old boy, that was fantastic." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "That was really good." I said, "I can't believe that." I said, "You're my hero telling me that." He said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous, old boy, you're my hero."
So yes, we worked together. When I was at Motorsport, we did lots of stuff together. We then ghosted a column for a magazine for a long time together. I'd just go around to his house in a car and we'd go off for a drive, and he'd tell me what he thought of the car, and I'd write the story up, and we'd split the fee, and that was all good fun. And yeah, and we just grew close over time. We raced a lot together in historic racing while he was still doing that. He only retired from historic racing when he was 81. And so yeah, so when the idea came to go back to Brescia to celebrate the extraordinary achievement of him and Norman Dewis on the 60th anniversary in 2012. It really was it was too good an opportunity to pass up. So off we toddled.
The other key protagonist in this film was Norman Dewis, who was arguably actually even more important than Stirling in a large respect. And
in the disc brake story?
In the disc brake story.
Yeah. Oh, unquestionably more important than Stirling.
I remember you, when you went almost off the edge, the car was way over there.
You exaggerate.
No, you was
just a little bit near.
You was laying on top of me almost with the steering in your hand. And I was looking, my head was pinned over there, and all I could see was about a 200-foot drop. But you got it back. And I know you was like this, and you said, "Can you light me a cigarette?"
Yeah.
We could have done.
And I used a whole box of matches.
Yeah, well, if they'd given us one cigar lighter, you'd done it in one.
That's right. We should have had a cigar lighter on board. That's right. Yeah.
He was, a total legend. And yeah, I mean, Stirling was very important to the history of the disc brake story because, without his clout at Jaguar, without his charisma and without his courage to go and do the race in a car with an unproven brake system, it would never. They'd never have done it. They'd have never got to the start line because if you haven't got Stirling Moss in your corner, then you couldn't get to do that sort of thing. Stirling kind of fronted it, but Norman was the engine room. Norman was the bloke who day after day was experiencing brake failures at 100 and something miles an hour.
And going to the filming side and sort of heading more behind the scenes now.
Yeah,
the pool of people that we brought together, being able to get that final group of the golden era of motorsport drivers and motorsport faces onto a film because it was filmed 8 years ago.
Well, I mean, you couldn't get Stirling and Norman anymore, very sadly. And yeah, I mean, at the time in 2012, they were the last surviving Mille Miglia crew, certainly that anybody knew about. I mean, Mille Miglia used to be done by locals and hundreds of people who never achieved any kind of fame at all. So it's possible, I guess, that there were then, or maybe even now, some people who used to do it fit 500. But certainly of all the names, of all the professional drivers, Stirling and Norman back in 2012 were the only surviving original crew. So to get them back to Brescia 60 years later, and then to have all those other people that we managed to get into the film, people like Jackie and Martin Brundle. I mean, it was. I mean, at the time, you're not really aware of the moment that you're living in.
It was 1981. I was 21. Stirling was 51, and we ended up teammates. They talked him into coming back. He said it was one of the worst things he ever did because he didn't like the car. He didn't like slick racing tyres, too much grip, and not the right feel for him. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me because I was able to watch the Maestro at work. I was young and full of ambition, a bit stupid because I didn't learn enough from Stirling at that time. And I learned a lesson from that. Instead of trying to blow his doors off at every opportunity, I should have just listened to him a little bit more. He struggled with the car except for one wet day at Brands Hatch when the track was treacherous, and he just lit up and headed off into the distance because I think it was the sort of grip level that he was used to. And we were thinking, there's no grip. And Stirling was obviously thinking, oh, this feels about right. I think I'll go for it. And that's how he was. And he only did one season in it. He turned up at the first race and they'd spelt his name wrong. The Stirling was as in Pan Stirling on the side of the car. I think he mentioned it a couple of times to them through the day, and they quickly changed it. But he's a class act. He was then, and he remains so today.
To have seen Stirling Moss in action, you've got to be at least 60 years old these days. So most people these days only know Stirling by repute, but he's still Mr. Motor Racing.
Living in, but 8 years down the road, particularly given the two main men are no longer with us, it's just, two things. I mean, one, it's great that it exists, and secondly, it's fantastic that after all this time, and as you know as well as I, it sat on the shelf for a very long period of time, this film, and you had to completely recut it and re-edit it and rework it. It's just fantastic that it's out there and that people have seen it, and it is now an historical document and will always survive, long after not only they've gone, but we've gone too.
Do you have any abiding memories of filming?
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget Brescia. That was, I had to get them there. I had to get Stirling there, which involved, I think, a Ryanair flight from Stansted. So you can imagine how amused he was by that. And we had Patrick Head with us, who actually went on to do the Mille Miglia retrospective itself in the car. And so I had Patrick and Stirling and Lady Susie Moss, and in a Ryanair check-in queue at Stansted at some horrible hour in the morning. And if I thought Stirling was bad at queuing at the canteen when I met up with them in the Mille Miglia in whatever it was in the mid-90s, it was nothing like as bad as he was standing in a Ryanair check-in queue. And we finally got him airside, and we didn't know what to do because the flight wasn't going to take off for a while. And Susie found this sort of priority pass card deep in her bag somewhere, which meant we could get into a lounge. And then suddenly, for a bit at least, the pressure was off, because it was my job to get these guys there and get them to Italy in reasonable condition. Anyway, we went there and we got there, and I can remember at the Canoa Hotel, Norman and Stirling meeting up with each other, and that was a very personal moment, because I don't think that they'd seen an awful lot of each other, and they certainly hadn't seen each other in Brescia since 1952. And for the two of them to be there, and I can just remember it was in the lobby of the hotel, and we all just sort of kind of stood aside because we realised that this didn't have anything to do with us. And these two old heroes, and they were properly old then. I mean, Norman was, gosh, what was Norman then? I think he was 91 even then.
He was definitely tapping 91.
Yeah. And they were just so pleased to see each other. And then in the square, when all the scrutineering was taking place, and they got absolutely mobbed. And the funny thing about Stirling is he's never been very good in those sorts of conditions. He's quite a private bloke. And as I said earlier, if he knows you and he likes you and he trusts you, then, he's the most, fun, vivacious. I keep on talking about him in the present tense, but that's how he still feels to me. But he couldn't cope with the crowds, and his memory, because he had the bang on the head in '62, his memory's never been terribly good. And people were shoving microphones under his nose and saying, "Stirling, what do you recall of that?" And he'd just say, "Oh, I think I'll let Norman answer that." And Norman was completely in his element. He just loved all. He couldn't shut him up. And we always knew that while Norman was there, everybody would be happy because he was so much fun. And he had total recall despite being in his 90s. Whereas the problem was getting Tony to talk, the problem with Norman was getting him to stop talking. And then obviously I can remember that moment when they went and did the start and they drove the car up onto the ramp, and that was pretty extraordinary and and quite emotional. And then I suppose the best bit was later that night back at the hotel, because that was just a very quiet dinner, which got quite drunken, and everybody was very relaxed because the difficult work had been done. We'd done what we'd gone there to do, and all the old stories came out, and you're just sitting there. On the one hand, you're just sitting there with a bunch of mates having a great dinner, having a few too many glasses of Chianti, having a great time, and then suddenly you'll just sort of stop yourself short, and you'll sit there and you'll think, that's Stirling Moss. And that's Norman Dewis. And I never quite, despite all the years and years and years I knew Stirling, I never quite got over being starstruck with him.
I think that's what me and Bryn found throughout the entire thing, was just the whole time we're just going, and we were essentially just bystanders comparatively. And
yeah, well, not really,
I mean, even though they made us feel so welcome all the time, we were Stirling Moss. Yeah, it'll go to my grave. Just sat there in, with the C-type as well, which we should probably come on to actually then. Tell us about your relationship with the C-type, and particularly the C-type in the film, because this is, if it's not clear in the film, the C-type that we film with is the actual car that Stirling drove all those years ago to win the race at Reims, where he stood in the opening sequence.
Yeah, exactly. So it is an astonishingly important car. So it was, I can't remember how many C-types they made. I think they made between 30 and 40. This is the fifth, and the first three were the original Works factory cars, one of which did the Mille Miglia, none of which survives. So forget the first three; they don't exist anymore. Number 4 was the first private car, which does exist, but it's it's a great and noble warrior, but it's had an awful lot of accidents and it's had a lot of bits replaced in it. So when Stirling wanted to go and do this race at Reims, they had to borrow a car, and the car that he borrowed belonged to a bloke called Tommy Sopwith. No, it didn't. It was Tommy Wisdom, and that was number 5. And so Stirling goes off and does this race in number 5 on disc brakes, becomes the first person ever to win a race driving a car using disc brakes. And that is the actual car with which, 60 years later, he went back to it. And to see him driving around Reims, and, when he drives away in that car in the opening sequence of the film, 60 years on from when he did that historic thing in it, was quite extraordinary. And given that the original Mille Miglia car doesn't exist anymore, there couldn't be a more appropriate substitute for the film than that.
The story that I'm going to tell you is that when he does the drive away into the sunset, Stirling didn't take the right exit to come back to us.
Oh.
So after about 3 minutes, we're all stood in the pit lane thinking, I wonder where the car's gone. And I was up in the top floor of the pit lane looking down, and you could just hear noise in the background as I could see the C-type on the auto route where he found his way onto. And everyone was thinking, does it have any fuel in it? It has no sat nav? And someone somewhere has seen a rogue Stirling Moss driving that C-type on an auto route in France, trying to find his way back to the pit lane for the next take just before the light died. And I think that was one of the great moments. We had, it was Vernon was like jumping in the Toyota to go off and try and find him. And that was just wonderful moments. But anyway, it was
Stirling at large in a C-type.
Someone somewhere has seen it, and I don't know.
And isn't it great that these things that we shared 8 years ago, that we actually knew at the time how special they were? Because sometimes you look back on things and you think, oh, that was good. It's special if at the time you're doing it, you're sitting there pinching yourself and thinking, I can't quite believe I'm witnessing this, or that I've played a part in this. And that whole episode for me was exactly that. It was an historic moment. There was no question about it at all. Getting them back to Brescia, putting Stirling back in that car, doing all those things. But also, I think, maybe even more than that, getting them to sit down and talk about it, and seeing Norman and Stirling together and interacting. And it was, I'm sure, the last time that they ever appeared anywhere together in any kind of formal capacity. I'm sure they would have been photographed at meetings and that sort of thing, but it was the last time they worked together, certainly as far as I am aware. And how wonderful to have been part of it.
I think it does. And Andrew, from my point of view, thank you so much for, in about 2011, coming up with an idea, going and knocking on Jaguar's door, writing a script, which I think I gave back to you recently when we
I saw it again. Yeah, I remember that.
4 or 5 page script that then came to us through the agency. And thank you for one of the best opportunities and experiences of my career so far.
And don't forget it. It's been a great, great pleasure, guys. And I hope it goes really, really well for you.
Thank you very much.
And please, if anybody's watching it, share the crap out of it, because it is an amazing story. And I think it is something that we've discussed previously here, but you're never going to see it again. We've both been involved in the automotive world now for a couple of decades, and we've seen some pretty cool stuff. And as you said, over the last 8 years, it's now 2020. Since we made that footage, we've all sat on productions, we've been in studios, and we've started swapping a few stories about making this film. And people sit up and go, you did what? With who? When? Murray Walker in his garden. And then we went for lunch with Murray Walker afterwards at the pub, after he tentatively sort of said, because we said we were going for lunch, and, do you want to come with us? And he's like, oh, absolutely. And then, another great story emanates.
I can't deny the people at home that story where we say, you go, Murray, do you want to go to the pub? And Murray, Murray is an extraordinary source of detail, much like Andrew as well. And when we went to the pub with him, we arrived and got out. It's just one of his local places, and he recommended it around the corner. And there's a car park out the back, and we just drive down, and I think it was your Land Rover. And we got out, and there's you, me, Tom Clarkson, and Murray, and another guy who just drives into the car park at about 700 miles an hour and nearly knocks Murray over. And I don't exactly recall the first time of what was said, but I think Murray was relatively oblivious to it. I think he'd swiped just past his back and we're like, oh my God, you just nearly killed Murray Walker. I think we planned to be there for about an hour. I think 3 hours later, after being regaled with stories of, Murray talking about Ayrton Senna and, his relationship with Stirling as well, and Norman, and just...
It took us from tears to laughter and emotion. It was just that one pub lunch.
I think that was... I'm going to put it out there and say that was my favourite pub lunch of all time.
Who else did we have a pub lunch with whilst making this film? Because that's the only other comparison I could make. No other pub lunches, and no offence to anybody I've had a pub lunch with, but yeah, I'm very with you, dude.
A few shandies later, and Murray's a little bit worse for wear as well. And we all leave the pub, and so does the guy who drove in. This guy wobbles over to his massive black Discovery as well. Either way, Murray is once again walking across, and there's this absolute final destination moment where we just see this black Discovery blazing towards Murray Walker across the car park again, going like, oh my God, he's going to kill Murray Walker again. Misses him just about.
Murray just basically went, he literally said something along the lines of nearly got me again or something like that.
He goes to make a swift exit, at which point he promptly runs the side of his car down the safety guard on the corner of the pub, basically writing off the side of the car as he scrapes this thing out of the pub, trying to leave. And Murray Walker's just sort of like done his thing. The curse of Murray Walker struck in true as gold real life. I think we've just about covered everything. I think that's there is so much more I think that we could talk about, and maybe over time we can release a couple more clips from the film that haven't. In fact, I'll do that in this video. At the end of this video, I'll put a couple more little clips in.
And it's been an incredible privilege to have been a part of this film, a very small part. And thank you so much for that opportunity as well, mate. 8 years ago, that phone call. I love doing these sorts of jobs with you. You know that. So. And there are a million stories which we can tell about this, and that's the wonderful thing, that this opportunity we had. So I'm going to shut up, get a bit emotional, and hope you enjoyed the film if you've seen it.
Yeah, thank you, and and indeed, Bryn, thanks for all your help. And I'm sorry we have to do this all remotely. And Andrew, again, thank you as well for your time. Everyone at home, I hope you really, really enjoyed the film. It's been such a long time coming, and it's not the greatest film of all time. It's not the best, but I hope it really sort of meant something huge to us, and I hope you kind of see that in the film. We'll try and do more films as always. We're going to try and carry on the projects, but in the meantime, if you like the film, please like it. If you hated it, please dislike it. But at least you can subscribe to more opportunities to like or dislike films. See you later.
Because I happened to win the US Grand Prix in 1960, I think, and it was my birthday, and they brought me a cake, and on it was a beautiful lotus on top of this, and I cut the front wheel off and gave it to Colin Chapman. He didn't think it was very funny, actually, but...
We get called in for the scrutineers, and the one scrutineer's looking around the car, and of course with the wire wheel, as you can see through the wire wheel. And he's looking and he said, excuse me, so I said, yeah. He said, where is the brake? I said, pardon? He said, where is the brake? Because he was looking for a drum. I said, no, this is a new brake. Oh. By this time, Neubauer, the team manager of the Mercedes, because they'd got 3 Mercedes, and it was the new 300 SL. But anyway, he walks over, Neubauer, and he pokes his head over and looks and said to the scrutineer, what is this? And they said, oh, it's a new configuration of a brake. And he just looked and he said, this car must be disqualified because it is not a proven article, it's not recognised. It could be a danger to the other people and all this. So he was arguing a bit, we were arguing with him, and then Count Margie again, he came over and he said, is there a problem, gentlemen? And we said, well, Neubauer's trying to disqualify us. He said, well, we can't see anything wrong. He said, you've done all the development, Mr. Dewis? I said, yeah. I said, it's all developed and signed off. He said, no, you can run. So there's no problem. They bring the Mercedes in, the first one, And the one screws engineer looks, and he said to the German guy with it, he said, where is the door? And so the German looked at it, pardon me, he said, where is the door? Then Neubauer walks up and he said, what's the problem? So they said, where is the door? So he walks over and he presses the button. And of course the whole side of the car and half the roof comes up, because as you know, it's the gold door. And so Neubauer said, there is the door. They said, oh, that is not a door.
I had a bloke who came up to me once, and he's in the street, and he said, Murray, that Michael Schumacher is the greatest driver of all time. And I said, hang on a minute. I said, what about Cracciola, Nuvolari, Rosamar, Jim Clark? Never heard of them, he said.